Hey guys, and welcome to this video where I talk about a game series that I kind of really love but also kind of really hate. The Neptunia series. Now, I doubt me being in a love-hate relationship with the Neptunia series is that odd of a thing. Hell, hating on the Neptunia series is probably kind of a popular thing to do right now within the Neptunia community. In this video, I will talk about the things I really like about the Neptunia series, which I think are also the main reasons for its strong community. But I will also talk about things I dislike about the Neptunia series. Also, at the end, I plan to talk about what I think the future of the Neptunia series might hold, and where I personally would like it to go. Spoilers, where I want the Neptunia series to go is not where I think it's headed. First, I think a general summary of the Neptunia series is in order. If anyone watching this haven't played the games yet and are interested in them. So, the Neptunia series is a JRPG series with its story focusing heavily on visual novel aspects. Some people consider it to be a visual novel with gameplay elements, other people consider it to be a JRPG with visual novel elements. As for what it is, well, it obviously isn't a visual novel. I mean, it isn't on Visual Novel Database, which is basically the place that determines what is a visual novel or not. Anyways, the main series Neptunia games are set in a world called Game Industry. This world is divided into 4 areas, each representing a console developer. PlayStation representing the PlayStation brand, Louis representing Nintendo. This is what happens when your console don't have a brand name. Leanbox representing Xbox, and Planet Toon, a reminder of what could have been if Sega didn't quit the console market. These areas are led by a goddess, with these goddesses being the main characters of the Neptunia series. These leaders are Neptune, the true protagonist and the leader of Planet Toon, Noir for PlayStation, Blank for Louis, and VIIR for Leanbox. These goddesses represent the home console, and they also have little sisters representing the handhelds. Nepgear representing the Sega Game Gear, ROM and RAM representing the DS line, Uni being the PSP or the PlayStation Vita, and VIIR being Forever Alone. Some other important characters are maker characters, who represent different Japanese game developers, with their personalities representing that company. For instance, Mages is a mage. Well, other than the obvious mage, she is also a Chunibyo, and she goes around looking for Dr. Pepper. So personality-wise, she is a reference to Okabe Rintaro, the main character of Steins Gate, which is a popular title by mages. As far as the stories go, they focus on different aspects within the game industry. Things like the console wars, piracy, some of the past history, and things like hardware generational shifts. So basically a game series that very much parodies elements of the real-world gaming history with lots of game references. Now, why do I like the Neptunia series? Well, if I were to quickly summarize it, what I like is the characters, the comedy, the world, the artwork, and the game references. As far as gameplay goes, I think the Rebirth series, which are remakes of the 3 first games, and Megadimension Neptunia Victory 2, the 4th game, has decent gameplay. But while it's decent, I wouldn't necessarily say it's good. So I don't think gameplay is why people play these games. The characters aren't the most deep, but rather often have over-the-top personalities that a lot of people find charming. The characters, in my opinion, work great for the comedy, as I think they play off each other really well, and they also work well within the situations that happens, whether comedic or serious. Voice voice acting is also really good. Personally, I play it in Japanese, but there are a lot of people who really enjoy the English dub. The world of game industry is, in my opinion, quite cool and interesting, and as far as the story goes, I think it manages to have a good balance between comedy and more serious moments. As far as video game history, the stories tackle them in interesting ways, and there are a lot of fun references to be found. Then there is the artwork. Now, as far as the 3D models go and the area design go, I don't really think the Neptunia games stand out as that good looking. It isn't exactly technically impressive. Where it does stand out though is the great 2D artwork by the artist Tsunako. So basically the art used for the visual novel segments. The backgrounds, sprites, the CGs, they all look fantastic, and I think it adds a lot of charm to the Neptunia series. Adding all of those elements together, I think makes for a really charming, fun experience. And I think this is why I, as well as so many others, have fallen in love with the Neptunia series. Well, now that I've said things I like about the Neptunia series, it is time to talk about things I don't like. Now, what problems do I have with the Neptunia series? Well, there are a lot, but let's start with the poor performance and bugs. On Steam, quite a lot of reviews mentioned encountering bugs and there being poor performance, with this being particularly bad early on. Myself, I've generally waited a little while after the initial release before playing Neptunia games, so I haven't encountered the worst of it, but I certainly have encountered a few bugs, like Rebirth tree freezing during a cutscene after some long boss battles multiple times, or a boss bugging out and becoming immortal in For Goddesses Online, and of course having problems opening Megadimension blank plus Neptune. Now, the problems with regards to programming doesn't end there with the bad unintended stuff. There are also some problems with how things are done that is intentional. While I've praised the great artwork in Neptunia, I would say the implementation is less than stellar. A great example of this is the CGs in Rebirth 1 and 2 on PC that has animations. Yeah, this is kind of bad. Now, why do they look like this? Well, by extracting the game files, I found that the character artwork for these CGs are 720p. This is lower than the 1080p that the game should be at, but this isn't the real problem. The actual problem is that the background of these CGs are 360p, and it seems like they just downscale all of the character art to fit into the 360p background, and as a result, well, you get a picture quality of 360p, which might even be further distorted, and there are also some black bars on the side. So this is how the artwork looks in the game. Now here is the same artwork, but I upscale the background and just put the character artwork in its native resolution, and here is how it looks when I upscale it to 1080p. As you can see, the art is very poorly represented in the game. Now these are the worst offenders, but other CGs also suffer from not being as good as they should have been in Rebirth 1, 2 and 3. When comparing the artwork found in the files versus the one in the game at a 1080p screen, it is clear that it just doesn't look as good as it should. This problem is fixed in Megadimension Neptunia Victory 2, where the in-game artwork represents the artwork in the files quite well, if only there weren't problems with the artwork in the files. Another problem with the artwork is that the Neptunia series really loves reusing assets. While I think reusing some assets is okay, I do think Compile Heart and Idea Factory, who are the developers of the Neptunia series, really takes it quite far, and this results in a lot of things like dungeons just ending up looking very similar over multiple games. Yes, these are different games. Now, while these problems with the art is rather annoying. At least in my opinion, I don't think they fundamentally make the games a lot worse. Not to say they don't make them worse at all though. The main thing about these problems so far though is that these problems seem to come from laziness of the company, performance problems and bugs coming from poorly done ports, a lack of care to ensure the beautiful artwork looks as good as it should, and how much assets are reused. To me, this very much looks like there are some creators in the company doing the heavy lifting, with people like Tsunako doing the wonderful artwork and the writers doing a good job with world building, characters, references, and comedy. The company itself though seemed to be too concerned about cutting costs to ensure other aspects of the game development are of the same quality, thus resulting in a game with some wonderful aspects and other half-baked aspects. So now on to the next segment of things I don't like about the Neptunia series. I will call this spin-offs, remakes, and the milking of Neptunia. In the beginning of the Neptunia series, main series titles were quite frequently released. The first Neptunia game, Hyperdimension Neptunia, came out in 2010. The sequel, Hyperdimension Neptunia Mark II, came out in 2011, and Hyperdimension Neptunia Victory came out 2012. So for the first three titles, they released one a year. The fourth title, Megadimension Neptunia Victory 2, came out in 2015, which marks a fairly larger gap than previously, but still isn't too long of a pause in releases. After that, well, so far we haven't seen another main series Neptunia game. What we've had since then has just been spin-offs and remakes. So first off, let's begin with the remakes. With the popularity of the Neptunia series as well as the characters, the developers of Neptunia figured out why not just milk the shit out of it? I mean, experiment with different genres of games with them. So they started making spin-offs, the first one being Producing Perfect, released in 2013. As far as the game goes, well, it's far from perfect. Calling it decent is also a bit of a stretch. The more appropriate title would probably be Producing Shit. This first spin-off is considered to be the worst one, to be fair, so the later ones weren't as bad, but it certainly set the standard low. With these spin-offs, most of the development was given to other companies, with Compile Heart and Idea Factory doing things like the art and also probably the story. For the most part, I think some of the charm of the main series remained in these spin-offs, but to a much lesser degree. The story and character moments, in my opinion at least, seem a fair bit weaker in these spin-offs, and there's also less of it, with the gameplay elements taking up larger chunks of the playtime. The gameplay in these spin-offs is generally not that good, and as a result these spin-offs are usually mediocre, and a large step down from the main series titles. These spin-offs has also been released really frequently, with roughly one each year, and this has resulted in there being far more of these mediocre spin-offs than the actual main series Neptunia games. Remakes is another way that the Neptunia series is getting milked. Now, the first remakes for the Neptunia series are called the Rebirth series. These are remakes of the three first games that originally released on PS3, this time releasing on the PlayStation Vita. While these remakes does come out not that long after the originals, I think they're actually quite understandable. Some of the characters in the first two games used names of game companies and they weren't allowed to use them for later releases, which meant that they had to rewrite the story somewhat. These two first games also had some problems, for instance the first game suffering from a bad gameplay system and the second one using not so good looking 3D models for the visual novel segments rather than the much better looking 2D sprites. With the third game, Neptunia Victory, it seems like they finally managed to get a Neptunia game out that was generally more appealing. So when they released the Neptunia series for the PlayStation Vita, they remade the first and second game to be much more similar to Neptunia Victory. with the same combat system and changing the script to work a bit better in general with the vibe of Neptunia Victory. Neptunia Victory became Rebirth 3 to my understanding without that many changes. The Rebirth series was then later ported to the PC, and I think most of the people who are fans of the Neptunia series outside of Japan became fans through the Steam release of the Rebirth titles. So the first remakes actually makes a lot of sense, and I think it's very much so responsible for the popularity of the Neptunia series. The problem though is every remake that happened afterwards. The next remake they did was Megadimension Neptunia VIIR, which is of course a remake of the fourth game Megadimension Neptunia V2. This remake was made for the same platform as the original, this being the PlayStation 4 and the PC, and it was released only 2 years after the original release. A bit of a problem with this release is that it was completely unnecessary. In many ways it's also the inferior release. The big new feature of Megadimension Neptunia V2R is the inclusion of the VIIR scenes. The VIIR scenes are neat enough, but I don't think they fit the game at all, and sometimes they spoil story elements, and generally I think they break up the story in a bad way. Simply put, it doesn't feel natural for the game to have them, and it just seemed shoehorned in, probably because it is. Another change is the new combat system, and honestly this new combat system is just bad. On one hand, it is overly complex with so many tutorials infodumping the insane amounts of different systems that make up the combat system. On the other hand, the game itself is really easy and you don't actually have to learn the majority of this stuff, as you can generally just spam basic abilities and win. So the combat system is in essence just an unnecessary bloated mess. On top of this, some of the content from the original has been cut, with one of the two endings being gone to streamline the game by only having one ending in the remake. DLC characters with their own short stories have also been removed due to licensing issues. With all of these problems, Megadimension Neptunia V2R just ends up being a very unnecessary disappointment. Unfortunately, it's not the last. The next game I will talk about isn't really a remake, but rather a re-release. Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth 1 Plus is basically just Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth 1 ported over to the PlayStation 4 with some rather meaningless extra features. While I don't have anything against them porting Rebirth 1 over to another platform, there are a few things I don't like about this release. One thing is the marketing on the main site for this release. Both for compile hard games and generally for visual novels as well, typically the main site of the game has info divided into different categories. As the game gets closer to release, info and screenshots are added to give a better idea of the product. Rebirth 1 Plus markets itself just the same way, but pretty much everything it would held were just things found in Rebirth 1, so it seemed meaningless to conceal it. Also, one thing I gotta say is, yeah, I'm personally salty about this release. I was dumb enough to buy it, as I really liked the Rebirth series and wanted it physically. The problem though is that Rebirth 2 and 3 were never released for the PlayStation 4, making for an incomplete collection of the main series on PS4. Then to add some salt on the wound for everyone stupid enough to get Rebirth 1 Plus, there is Neptunia Reverse for the PlayStation 5. Neptunia Reverse was released for the 10-year anniversary of the Neptunia series, and it is a remake of Neptunia Rebirth 1. Yes, in 10 years they managed to get to the point of making a remake of a remake. This one I've not picked up, as while I'm stupid, I'm not that stupid. I mean, just give them a few years and they'll probably release something like Neptunia Relearn for the new Nintendo Switch, which will be a remake of Reverse. So since I've not picked up this title, my comments on it will be based on the new features that they promoted and what I've seen about them online. Now, this remake comes with 5 new features. One is a new, arguably worse looking UI. Then there is a dumb new mode where you can play through the game on your first playthrough while using every character instead of, actually unlocking them in the story. There is also a new fishing minigame. Yeah, this is their biggest feature, by the way. There has also been a graphical upgrade, as this is a PlayStation 5 release and they now have the extra powerful hardware at their disposal. So now instead of looking like a PlayStation Vita game, it looks like a well-optimized PlayStation 3 game. Then, other than that, there are some new CGs, not drawn by Tsunako, the original artist, and these drawings are rather underwhelming, with things like bland backgrounds and boring poses, and it's quite a step down from the other CGs. So looking at all of these so-called upgrades, I would say that this release just seems unnecessary. Rebirth 1 Plus is on the PlayStation 4, and it is playable on the PlayStation 5, so it isn't a needed port to be able to play Rebirth 1 on the PlayStation 5. As for why this remake even exists, my best guess would be that they just wanted something to release early on in the PlayStation 5's lifespan, to lure people into buying this for the next gen experience, for people who just got a PlayStation 5 and lacked new PlayStation 5 titles to buy early on. Other than this, maybe they wanted something for the 10th anniversary and just didn't have anything else. Regardless, this release just screams unnecessary. So now let's talk about the future of the Neptunia series. So since the release of Megadimension Neptunia Victory 2 in 2015, the Neptunia series has only released remakes and spin-offs. The spin-offs generally being mediocre, with the only one that I properly liked being Four Goddesses Online, and with remakes after the Rebirth series being pointless, either bringing very minor upgrades or even some downgrades. Megadimension Neptunia Victory 2 pretty much seemed to mark the end of Compile Heart trying to actually improve the series and put effort into making something actually good, which as someone who's a fan of the Neptunia series is quite sad. From what I can see, the future of the Neptunia series looks quite bleak. The last few years really haven't done much to reassure me that they will do a proper main series release or that they will make a high effort spin-off. Also, one problem is that the artist Tsunako, who is the main artist for the Neptunia series, has left the company, and while she does some work for them as a freelancer, the amount she's done for them since she left is really small compared to what she did when she worked for them. As far as her importance for the Neptunia series, I would say she is quite important, as her great art really brings the world and the characters to life. There is one thing though that does give me a slight glimmer of hope with regards to a new main series title, and that is that the new console generation with the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X has come out. With a new generation of hardware, this could inspire the story for the new main series title. As for what I myself would like from the Neptunia series, it would be for them to either completely stop with the spin-offs or at the very least heavily reduce how frequently they're released. I would also love to see a new main series title where they put effort into making it something even better than their previous main series titles. As for remakes, I would like for them to stop doing half-assed remakes. If they want to do remakes, they should make substantial improvements on the original. Anyways, to end this off, I'm not too confident in the future of the Neptunia series, but I hope I'm wrong. While I still love the Neptunia series due to the Rebirth series and Megadimension, the mediocre spin-offs and the disappointing remakes has somewhat soured my feelings for it. I think a lesson from this, which I also think you can learn from a lot of other video game franchises, is that loyalty towards a series you like isn't always good, at least not when the quality of what they release is in decline. So this is it for this video. If you liked the video, maybe you could leave a like and also maybe consider subscribing.